A great many modern legends have been vandalized in recent times. Star Wars, Star Trek, Ghostbusters, The Terminator, James Bond, and on and on and on. One of the latest victims of this trend is the Masters of the Universe. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe were some of my favorite toys growing up, so you would think that I would be deeply affected by this. But I'm not. I mean, it does bother me, but only because it bothers other fans who most certainly deserve better. A lot of people seem to want to blame Kevin Smith. Is that really fair? Well, honestly, I don't give a damn if it is or if it isn't. In my mind, Netflix as a whole is who holds the blame. On the other hand, though, I think that Kevin Smith is just an incredible doofus who has spent his whole career jerking off. I'm sure I like the movie Clerks. What else is there, though, that makes this guy such an icon? Mallrats? I mean, I know that he has a high opinion of his own work. Take this scene from Chasing Amy, in which an on-screen writer of Jay and Silent Bob takes a metafictional turn to give us Smith's own view of his most famous characters.
I love these guys! You know what? They're like Bill and Ted meet Cheech and Chong!
Yeah, I kind of like to think of them as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern meet Vladimir and Estragon.
Sorry, dude. You're not Shakespeare. You're not Samuel Beckett. You're not even Don Bluth. And I hate to break it to any Kevin Smith fans, but Netflix did not hire him for his writing ability. Kevin Smith was supposed to have the same kind of role that Spielberg had with the Tiny Toons and Animaniacs. They wanted Kevin Smith for the name, not the talent. Why on earth he would accept the job is beyond me. Plenty of people have dug up old comments from the man in which he claims that he never liked the Masters of the Universe. If you have no emotional attachment to a story or character, then leave it alone. It is admittedly possible for the uninitiated to do well with established works, but I don't know why Netflix didn't just find a talented writer who loves the characters. Take this example, Freddy vs. Jason. It's not a great film. I personally enjoy the hell out of it. But it's not really a movie, so much as it's a great piece of pay-per-view wrestling. The director of the film, Ronnie Yu, even he described it that way.
Now you have these two monsters together now in a ring. It's almost like a WWF thing, you know?
Speaking of the director, what kind of challenges did the studio have finding the proper director for Freddy vs. Jason? Did they just take any asshole off the street? No. It had to be someone who cared about the project.
What was hard to find is there were people who loved the characters, who knew everything about them and had seen every movie 15 times, but didn't have the experience. And then there were people who had more experience, but kind of were like, oh yeah, I think I saw one back in the theater way back when. And we were like, what are you doing here? Like, why would you want to take this on if you don't care about these characters?
So, I don't care what it is you're making. Even if it's just Freddy vs. Jason. Even if it is just a Masters of the Universe cartoon. You should care about it if you're going to do it. And clearly, the people involved in this shit did not care at all. Now, I see a lot of people associating this new cartoon with the classic Filmation series. There is no connection at all, though. Netflix and Kevin Smith even admit to that. They admit that their show is at most a spiritual successor to the classic series. They don't have the legal rights to make a sequel to the Filmation series. The Masters of the Universe has been revamped and reimagined and rewritten over and over and over again. This is just another reboot. It might be the worst reboot yet, but it is still just a reboot, not a sequel. That doesn't make it okay, but it does make it less consequential. Like I said, though, I never even liked the old cartoons. I loved the toys. Absolutely loved them. If I still had a collection of the classic figures, I'd still be playing with them to this day. And it is the toys, not any cartoon or movie, that matters to me. The best He-Man stories in my mind were the ones that were told in my mind when I was a child. And that's why I didn't like the Filmation cartoons. They're nostalgia now, with all the enchantment that implies. But when I was a kid, I thought they were pretty boring. So did all of my friends. I mean, we watched them anyway because we were kids and it was on TV. But the classic cartoons just did not give us what we were looking for. We were there for sorcery and sword fights and monsters, adventures and danger. What we got was a sugar-coated show designed to keep the parents happy. Every single episode was a moral lesson. And just to really drive the point home, every episode ended with one of the characters explaining the moral of the story in detail.
Maybe there's something about yourself that you don't like. A bad habit, maybe.
It's easy to say I can't change, but the truth is, you can change almost any behavior if you really want to.
And the first step is saying to yourself, I can.
It really doesn't make sense to eat too many sweets between meals. A little snack is fine, but don't overdo it, because if you do, you won't have room left for the 3 healthy meals, which you should have every day.
Lame, 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 lame!
Even at that young age, I found that condescending. And, it just wasn't fun. No kid really has much use for a show that is sculpted around boring moral lessons. This was the kind of thing that the Animaniacs made fun of years later with the Wheel of Morality.
It's time to learn the day's lesson. And to find out what it is, we turn to the Wheel of Morality. Wheel of Morality, turn, turn, turn. Tell us the lesson that we should learn. Moral number 5. And the moral of today's story is... early to rise and early to bed makes a man healthy but socially dead.
Whoa, the mind boggles.
Whoa, wacko, Dot, hold up.
Why?
It's that time again.
Oh no, not the Wheel of Morality.
Afraid so. It's time to learn the moral of today's story.
No!
Hey, come on! The Wheel of Morality adds boring educational value to what would otherwise be an almost entirely entertaining program.
You know which He-Man stories I did enjoy? The mini-comics that the figures were packaged with. Back then, when you bought a Masters of the Universe action figure, it came with a story. A small mini-comic to tell you something about the characters. And those were a lot more fun than the cartoons. Well, the early ones were anyway. Eventually, when the cartoons became so popular, the mini-comics started to follow that formula of teaching kids right from wrong. Is there something special you discovered? Sure, everyone, even He-Man, needs help from his friends sometimes. Yuck. Oh well, all good things come to an end. But before that inevitable descent into safe and saccharine stories, there were some truly fierce and enjoyable battles for young minds to feast on. It gave us the fuel we needed to imagine new battles and new adventures that we created, and that's what those stories were for. In our own minds, the characters did not tell us to look both ways before crossing the street, or to always be honest. Instead, they did battle. When we held those toys, we were like gods holding the fate of cosmic gladiators in our hands.
The gods are pleased with you. They will watch the battle.
And that's what I really want to do with this video, now that I've finally gotten around to it.
And to make a long story short, too late!
I don't just want to complain about modern trash. I'd rather reminisce about the old stories. Back in the early stories, the villains were dangerous. The heroes could be beaten. In Triclops' first appearance, he outfought Ram Man, Battle Cat, and then Teela, before fighting He-Man, and even that contest was a real fight. Not that the heroes were easy to defeat. Fisto could outfight Clawful and then Jitsu, but then he lost hard to Whiplash. He-Man rushes to the rescue, and I love the way he didn't even bother to fight the villain. He just rides in and shoots the fucker.
You got a plan? Just go in and shoot those fuckers.
It wasn't just He-Man's allies who could lose either. Back in the early stories, even He-Man could be beaten. It was usually through ambush or that he was outnumbered, but He-Man fell in battle more than once. Here you see Merman stealing his harness from him, which was particularly bad news, because in those stories, it was the suit and not the sword that gave He-Man his strength. He-Man's allies had to come to his rescue frequently, which made sense. What good would those characters be if they couldn't contribute to victory? I showed you this? Well, this is what followed. In another story, a fall from the walls of Castle Grayskull nearly cost He-Man his life. He-Man's super strength garment absorbed the impact of the fall, but Skeletor would not accept defeat. He might have destroyed He-Man with the energy blade had he not heard a guttural scream. Skeletor would have killed He-Man in that scene if it hadn't been for Battle Cat. These stories were not safe and happy. Their lives were on the line. They could be hurt. The good guys had to fight as hard as they could. The overall flavor of the story was more barbaric, even when it wasn't the mini-comics, because there were full-size comic books on the shelf before the cartoons were made. In the 1982 miniseries, He-Man and his allies were depicted not only as formidable warriors, but as savage warriors. Is all anyone here concerned with to be credited for the kills? Just do it. We can divvy up the bodies later. In that story, He-Man was forced into a quest for Skeletor, because Skeletor had taken the sorceress hostage. I say we forget his unholy quest, and find instead the lair of that demon most foul. Much would I prefer sinking my fangs into his fetid flesh, and watching Skeletor's life ooze away at my feet. Skeletor's capture of the sorceress was not easy. We got to see that battle too. They fought. The sorceress managed to disarm Skeletor, but it wasn't enough. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing is Skeletor punching the sorceress in the face. Later in that same series, we see Skeletor fighting a rival sorcerer. It ends with Skeletor leaving the man's burning body on the floor. The savagery was not confined to that one series. In the minicomics, you had scenes like this one. Skeletor in a stolen Talon fighter firing on Eternian soldiers. It doesn't look quite as harmless as the famous cartoon. I've watched a few live streams about He-Man nostalgia, and I've heard more than one enthusiast say that He-Man would never kill. But that's not what I remember. You can tell me that maybe this monster survives He-Man's blade, but not this one. He slew the Glorm. And here we have He-Man hurling his sword into Skeletor's chest. Yes, Skeletor survives, but you're going to have a hard time convincing me that that was a deliberate wound, and not an attempted kill. And I want to address the Prince Adam situation. I said this in one of my earlier videos, but it's worth saying again here. In the first He-Man stories, there was no Prince Adam. He-Man was a savage, something more like a caveman than royalty. He helped the sorceress defeat a monster, and she rewarded him with weapons created by ancient scientists from before the Great Wars. Back then, He-Man did not live in any castle. Instead, he carved his home out of the side of a mountain. With his fists. So, how did the change come about? Well, there was no transition to the Prince Adam version of the story. It was just written that way as though the older stories didn't exist. It was the first major retcon, the first of many. In his first stories, though, Prince Adam was not quite the same as what people remember now. In the earliest He-Man DC comic books, which do predate the cartoons, Prince Adam couldn't just change into He-Man anywhere. He had to go to the Cave of Power. There, and only there, could he become He-Man. It was established in those comics that He-Man's mother, the Queen, was not from Eternia. She was from an other-dimensional world called Earth. He-Man is half-human, Earth-human. That was kept in the cartoons, but not everything about the comic book version of Prince Adam was carried over into that family-friendly show. In the early comic book stories, Prince Adam was depicted as a rough and bumbling oaf who was an untrainable show-off. Oh, and he got into random brawls with commoners. Shall we step outside? By all means, good prince. After you. By my father the king, this is going to be fine. Prince Adam was also known for carousing with women. Here he is interrupted, in flagrante delicto. And in another scene, he arrives at a royal celebration with a girl on each arm. Man-at-Arms makes fun of him. Only 2 wenches, lad? You're losing your charm. This is the cover of the issue that had He-Man's first comic book appearance outside of the mini-comics. Yes, that's Superman. That was the theme of DC Comics Presents. Every issue paired Superman with a different character, so it was an interesting way to test the waters for a He-Man comic book. It was Skeletor who inadvertently brought Superman to Eternia through magic. Before long, Superman met He-Man. They decided to join forces against Skeletor. That wasn't the best idea, really. Superman is, and always has been, particularly vulnerable to magic. Skeletor cast a spell on him to turn him against He-Man. And that battle was actually seriously cool. You would expect some circumstance to stop the fight before one of the heroes is defeated. But that didn't happen. We got to see a real fight with a real winner. It was fast and decisive. He-Man lost. Hard. Not to worry, though. Superman managed to overcome the magic indirectly. Skeletor did escape, of course, through teleportation, as he often did. Superman did visit Eternia a second time. And for a second time, Superman learned that fighting Skeletor was not a good idea. This was the story that ended with Skeletor being stabbed with that thrown sword. He-Man was saving Superman's life. Alright, so I'll end all this with a little fan theory of my own. Nothing to be taken too seriously, mind you. It's just a fun idea. But why is it that Prince Adam was chosen to be He-Man? There are later stories that tell us that He-Man is part of a special bloodline. That is not from any of the old stories, though. That is not from the old mini-comics. It is not from the DC Comics miniseries. It is not from the Star Comics series. It is not even from the Filmation cartoons. The concept of He-Man's special bloodline was created for the 2002 cartoon. There were a lot of stories before that. And that particular reboot, that means less to me than the first cartoons even, so I'm going to set that aside and look for a better explanation. What explanation could there be? In the old stories, any of the old stories, why would harmless Prince Adam, or worse yet, oafish Prince Adam, be chosen, when there were so many other noble heroes to choose from? What did Adam have that the others did not? It's arguable that he was just the single noblest and the purest of heart. And it could be that his royal blood was a part of the equation back then too. Then again, could his earthling heritage be a part of it? Could it be from his mother? Could the Queen have granted her son that extra component that Prince Adam had, that no Eternian could have had? He-Man's mother isn't from just any Earth. If the crossovers with Superman are any indication, He-Man's Earth is the DC Universe. In the 90s, there was a DC Comics miniseries called Invasion. A coalition of planets attacked the Earth. It wasn't out of conquest, though. They were afraid of the Earth. There were more superpowered beings from Earth than from any other known planet. And the story explained why that is. According to Invasion, and a great many DC comics that followed, it was because of something called the metagene, a certain biological predication present in about 20% of the population. It gave them the potential to form superpowers. Barry Allen and Wally West both had it, and that's why they gained super speed. Most people being struck by lightning and chemicals at once would not gain any powers at all. They would just be fried. The Flash wasn't. He gained superpowers. That is the result of the metagene. The metagene could even make some people eligible for magical powers. Even Dr. Fate has the metagene. So, if the Queen of Eternia was from that Earth, could she have carried the metagene? And could she have passed that on to Prince Adam? Is that part of what gave him the ability to channel the power of Grayskull when no one else could? Is Prince Adam a DC Universe metahuman?
By the power